Well, good afternoon, shalom, kia ora tātou, talofa lava, and thank you for coming on this typically glorious Wellington Day to commemorate the United Nations International Holocaust Remembrance Day. I would also like to acknowledge that this Jewish urupa here stands on land which is associated with the Port Nicholson Block Settlement Trust and the mana whenua who are Taranaki whaanui ki te upoko o te ika. A special welcome to the members of Parliament here today and to former members, to their excellencies, the members of the Diplomatic Corps, to the Race Relations Commissioner, Meng Foon, to faith leaders, those engaged in interfaith activities, to the Mayor of Wellington, Andy Foster, and Wellington City Councillors, to the Chair of the New Zealand National Commission for UNESCO, Robin Baker, to our honoured and cherished Holocaust survivors, and all other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and mokopuna. Today we remember the anniversary of the liberation of the concentration, labour and death camps used by the Nazi German regime from 1933 to 1945 to incarcerate, torture, provide slave labour and kill Jews and others targeted by the regime. Today is the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau by the Soviet Army in 1945. The gratitude of the camp inmates was immense because they had opportunities now, or then, for living where before their fate was certain death. And that is why we also have a focus today on the Holocaust survivors and displaced persons who made new lives for themselves once they had been liberated, who had families, who became productive members of society. About 1,200 refugee Jewish displaced persons, DPs, came to New Zealand and contributed hugely to their new homeland. Many came to Wellington and enriched our city with their life's work, and their descendants continue to do so. But today's event is not only a Jewish event. We know that because it takes place on a day designated by the United Nations in 2005, and it's co-sponsored in New Zealand by UNESCO, the United Nations Education, Scientific and Cultural Organization, and also the Human Rights Commission and the Wellington City Council. Remembering the Holocaust is universally acknowledged as a way of reminding ourselves of what horrors human beings are capable of perpetrating. We remember the 6 million Jews killed during the Holocaust because we want to avoid similar horrors happening in the future. And that means happening to anyone, because we know and remember that Holocaust victims included Roma and Sinti people, often known as gypsies, homosexuals, disabled people, and others because of their ethnicity or political views. Shockingly and sadly, similar genocides have been carried out during the last 75 years in Bangladesh, in Cambodia, against the Iraqi Kurds, in Bosnia, in Rwanda, in Darfur, in Myanmar, and now against the Uyghurs in China. Unfortunately, it's a grim list. Because of what we now know and keep on learning about the Holocaust, we say never again. But this has little meaning if we don't take action to prevent those things happening again. For example, the at least 1 million incarcerated Muslim Uyghurs. We cannot say we do not know about them. We do. We must raise our voices and keep on calling on our government and the international community to do more. As Jews, we know about this because we know what happened to the Jewish people, even when the world knew what was happening. But doing something is what never again means. I will now call on the Rabbi from the Wellington Jewish Community Center, Rabbi Ariel, to say the El Rachamim Memorial Prayer. I will ask you to stand for the prayers, please. El Mana Rachamim is a memorial prayer for the dead used on remembrance days, such as this one. It will be recited in Hebrew by Rabbi Tal, and I hope you'll be able to give us an English translation as well. Thank you.
El Male Rachamim Shochem Bamromim Hamtzeh Menucha Nechona Al Kanfei HaShechina Ma'alon Kedoshim Uteorim Zokia Mazirim Denishmod HaKdoshim HaTeorim Shomtu Vesheneru Veshenishchatu Veshenisrefu Veshenitbeu ושנחנקו על קידוש השם על ידי הצוררים הגרמנים, יימח שמם וזכרם. בעבור שבנינו אנחנו מתפללים בעד הזכר נשמותיהם בגן עדן, תהא מנוחתם. לכם בעל הרמים יאסירם בסדר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצור רעים ונשמותיהם. אדוני הוא נחלתם, וינוחו בשלום על משכבותיהם, ונאמר Amen. O God, full of mercy, who dwells on high, grant proper rest on the wings of the divine presence, in the lofty levels of the holy and the pure ones, who shine like the glow of the firmament for the souls of the holy souls and pure ones, who were killed, murdered, slaughtered, burned, drowned, and strangled for the sanctification of the name, through the hands of the German oppressors and their collaborators, יימח שמם. Because we will pray in remembrance of their souls, may the resting place be in the Garden of Eden. Therefore may the Master of Mercy shelter them in the shelter of his wings for eternity. And may he bind their souls in the bond of life. Hashem is their heritage, and may they repose in peace on their resting places. Now let us respond. Amen.
Kaddish will now be recited by Harvey Livschitz from the Wellington Progressive Jewish Congregation. Although Kaddish is the traditional Jewish prayer used at funerals and memorial services, there is no reference in it to death. It is an affirmation of the greatness of the Maker of the universe and ends with a prayer for peace.
Yitgadal v'yitgadash Shemei Rabbi. Yalma divrach yiratei v'amich malchitei. V'chayechon v'yomechon. Uv'chayei dekol Beit Yisrael ba'agala v'zman kariv v'imru. Yei Shmei Rabbi m'varach l'olam v'olmei olmaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal Shmei dekudashah. Leila mikol bichata v'shirata. Tushbachata v'nechimata, damiran bialma v'imru. Yesh lama rabba mishamaya, v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu yaseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru.
Thank you, Rabbi and Harvey. And I'll ask you to remain standing for a minute's silence to remember those who perished during the Shoah, the Holocaust. Thank you. Please be seated. I will now ask Mayor Andy Foster from the Mayor of Wellington to address us.
Tēnā koutou katoa, shalom aleichem. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be able to say a few words on this really significant occasion to you. First of all, just like to say, Your Excellencies, Ambassador Ran, welcome to New Zealand. It's lovely to have you here. Ambassador Stefan, it's lovely to have you here. And I think very appropriate to have you sitting side by side in this particular circumstance. To the Race Relations Commissioner, Ming, lovely to see you here as well. MPs, I know I've seen Greg O'Connor, Chris Bishop, Nicola Willis, I don't think any others, and I'm not sure any other councillors around, but anyway, I'd like to recognise you all, but I'd like to recognise everyone here. David's already talked about, and David, it's lovely to be here and an honour to be here with you here and all that you do for the Jewish community. So a privilege to be here among you friends. But this day is about, and in fact I look behind me here, lest we forget, and this day really is about reminding us that we should never forget. And I think David sadly has read out that list of things, that the terrible evil that was done during the Holocaust to not just the Jewish people but also to many other people. You've listed gypsies, homosexuals, other people who didn't fit in with the evil Nazi regime, who suffered, who died, who were murdered in the concentration camps by the Nazi regime. But as you said, David, we have in many ways forgotten. There are atrocities that are committed around the world to people because of who they are, and that is just wrong. It may be it's your race, your religion, your creed, whatever it is, sexual orientation. Those things are wrong, and those are the things that we must stand up against. And in fact, what you said, David, is that we know that is happening. You mentioned the Uyghur in China, and if I may say, we tiptoe as a nation between what is in our interests economically and what we know is the right thing to do as human beings in supporting other people. And I think our response in this country too, we saw on our own soil the terrible atrocity that was done in Christchurch with the mosque massacres. And I think that we responded as a nation in exactly the right way, led by our Prime Minister, which essentially said we are all one. We are diverse and we should celebrate that diversity, but we should also be united in our diversity. We should enjoy our diversity, not see it as something that divides us. It's also very appropriate that we here as the capital city should lead the way, partly because we are the seat of government, but also because we're the place which the diplomatic corps represents many of the nations of the world. And one of the things that I really love about the job that I have as mayor is being able to meet with the ambassadorial community, from all over the world, and there's a fantastically strong community and a group of people who I think get on really well together. And that is something that is very special about Wellington. But also partly because Wellington has been the home of the earliest organised Jewish communities in this country since 1840. It's been said that those who fail to learn from the history are condemned to repeat it, and we certainly do not want more genocides nor discrimination against any minority group. I think we talked about a year or so ago about a resolution to adopt a resolution against anti-Semitism. But in fact, the feedback we got from our community is that we need to make sure that we do that against any form of oppression. And one of the other things that I had recently was the pleasure of having the Interfaith Council come and talk to me about how we can work together, all faiths, and that's a really special part of what is going on. Manjit, I see you over there as well, but all faiths coming together to try and learn and to promote understanding between those different faiths so that we can celebrate those together. And that's something that's very, very special. I look forward to continuing to do that. So an immediate initiative we had is that at our citizenship ceremony, which we have regularly when we're welcoming new citizens to New Zealand, that we actually have somebody from the Interfaith Council representing that diversity of faith. And that our council meetings now, and David and Manjit have been to our council meetings. So the first council, the last council meeting at the end of last year, we said that's the first time we had the Interfaith Council coming along to us and saying a prayer, and it didn't matter which faith it was in. In this case, David prayed for us. And that's a very, very special part, again, about celebrating our diversity through the different faiths we have. I also want to tell you just a few stories here. We are fortunate. One of the themes this year is not just lest we forget, but it's also about the people who have been displaced by the terrible things, whether it's war or oppression. And the Jewish community in Wellington has made such an enormous difference to our community, and I think we ought to celebrate that. And I wanted to give you two stories. One of those is about Jewish refugees who came from Europe and have come and contributed so much to our city and to our nation. German-born Harry Saracen has been called the godfather of Wellington's cafe culture. Now, he started with the coffee gallery in Parsons Bookshop, much loved bookshop, on Lambton Quay. Saracen then set up the restaurant at Downstage Theatre, where the meals matched the plays. Later, he established the Settlement, which combined restaurant, art gallery, craft market and performance space. It was the start of a vibrant coffee and arts atmosphere that we all love in Wellington today. Harry's sons and grandson are celebrated New Zealand cinematographers. The second one I wanted to mention was the Czech-born Fred Ternovsky, who became one of Australasia's largest manufacturers of soft leather goods and a leader in the New Zealand Manufacturers Federation. Fred gave huge impetus to the development of music and other arts, helping set up chamber music and opera in Wellington and New Zealand, and prominent on the Arts Council. He was a trustee of the New Zealand International Festival of the Arts and a member of the Project Development Board of the Museum of New Zealand, Te Papa Tongarewa. The Ternovsky Endowment Trust continues his philanthropy in the arts to this very day. I guess what I'm saying is that these men who were displaced from Europe in terrible conditions have contributed so much to our city, and we are very grateful for that. I'm just going to finish off with one last saying, and it is from Elie Wiesel, who was a Romanian-born American writer, professor, political activist, Nobel laureate and Holocaust survivor. And what she said is, even in darkness, it is possible to create light. Again, thank you for being able to say a few words on this important occasion.
Thank you, Mayor Andy. I was particularly struck by your analysis of where we each as individuals can take action to make sure that the things of the Holocaust don't happen again. And Wellington you're one of a long line of mayors who have been very sensitive to the remembrance of the Holocaust and sensitive also to the importance of recognising diversity in our city and improving that situation. So thank you to you representing your predecessors and the council as well. I'd like to now ask the Ambassador Designate of the State of Israel, His Excellency Ron Yaakoby, to address us.
Shalom. Tenakoto katoa. My respects to the members of parliament here and former members, to the excellencies, the members of the diplomatic corps, to human rights commissioners, to the mayor of Wellington and Wellington city councillors, to regional councillors, to the UNESCO representative, to faith and interfaith representatives, to honored Holocaust survivors and their descendants, and all other distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, and children. Today, the international community commemorates the 76th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau. Defeating the Nazi war machine and evil purpose was an effort of many. We mark the ability of the international community to unite, to work for a common goal, and the duty and the imperative of the international community today to continue to work together on the basis of shared values as we face anti-Semitism and racism, radical forces that spread chaos and destruction, hatred and fear of human dignity and humanity itself. Here in New Zealand, we also commemorate and honor the brave Jewish families who fled the atrocities of the Second World War and traveled to these shores to start a new and better life for themselves. However, it was not smooth sailing from the start. Following the Great Depression, New Zealanders were worried about immigrants taking their jobs. At that time, non-British immigrants were discouraged. And some parliamentarians thought Jewish people would not be easily assimilated into what was a much more homogeneous society than the New Zealand of today. In fact, eventuality proves New Zealand has benefited immensely, as Mr. May has mentioned, from the enterprise and accomplishments of Jewish people who have been able to make this country their home. Sadly, though, anti-Semitism is a chronic disease. It can be felt still, even here in New Zealand. The only vaccine to it is education. In a recent study by the European Commission and the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights, 80% of young Jewish people surveyed in Europe say that anti-Semitism is a problem in their country and believe it has grown in the past 5 years. 44% indicated that they were targeted at least once in the year before the survey. Yet, startling, very few report such incidents, with 80% opting not to do so. These findings make for grim reading. Recently published figures show us that in the year 2020, anti-Semitic incidents that were reported in New Zealand had doubled from the previous year. We must fight anti-Semitism. And I would like to thank the 34 countries that have already adopted the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's definition of anti-Semitism that Mr. Mayer has mentioned. A comprehensive definition that includes all types of contemporary anti-Semitism. And I call on all countries to do the same. This definition is a meaningful tool in the fight against anti-Semitism, both in education and political discourse and in the field of law enforcement. Such an effort can be followed by New Zealand joining the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. Together, we will continue to fight anti-Semitism and racism. We will fight Holocaust denial and distortion. We will educate, and we will remember, so that history does not repeat itself. Among all the chaos, the State of Israel still offers a safe haven for Jews from all over the globe. In the last year alone, over 16,000 Jews, mostly from the United States and Europe, have made Israel their homeland. Israel will forever be the home of the Jewish people. It is where we, Jews, came from, and where we return to after 2,000 years of exile. Dear New Zealand Holocaust survivors, your strength of spirit built houses and planted trees. Your heroism ensured a brighter future for your children and grandchildren, where they could grow and live in this safe and free country. May the memory of the victims of the Holocaust and those who waged war on Nazism be forever in our hearts. Thank you. Shalom. And Nai Mihi Nui.
Thank you, Ambassador Designate, for the very pertinent points that you raised. The New Zealand Jewish Council and other Jewish organizations have started working to ask the government to adopt the definition which you referred to, which we also think is tremendously important to be able to, by defining anti-Semitism, be in a better position to fight against it. When you name something, you have a target to oppose it, and that is very much the case with anti-Semitism, which has existed, unfortunately, in New Zealand for, well, I think back to Prime Minister Vogel, the first Jewish Prime Minister of New Zealand, who faced anti-Semitic cartoons during his political career. So it is long established, unfortunately. And I hope with your help, we'll be able to continue our campaign to have the definition adopted and for New Zealand to join the International Holocaust Memorial Alliance. I'll now call on Carol Ratnam to speak to us. Carol is from a family covered by references made earlier to those who came from the horrors of the Holocaust to New Zealand and made new lives here. And Carol will give us her personal account of that.
Ina mana, ina reo, ina karanga maha o te wā, tēnā koutou katoa. This is my spiritual pepeha. Ko hasi nai toko manga, ko Jerusalem toko ukai pau, ko Goldstein Fisher toko iwi, ko Kelvin Ratnam toko tānei. No te whanganui a tara ahau, ko Chai Frandl, but Dov Menachem Virachel toko ingoa. Ke te whakapiri ahau, toko whakapapa, ki te tau huhu o Aotearoa. No rera, tēnā koutou katoa. What I said was, my mountain is Mount Sinai. My spiritual home is Jerusalem. My tribe is Goldstein Fisher. My husband is Kelvin Ratnam. I am from Wellington. My name is Carol Ratnam, and I gave my Hebrew name, which is Chai Frandl Bat Dov Menachem Virachel. I bring my whakapapa to join with the backbone in the meeting house of New Zealand. Shalom whānau. On the 27th of January 1945, 76 years ago, Auschwitz was liberated by Soviet forces. 12 years ago, on the 27th of January 2009, on this UN Holocaust Day commemoration, it was held in that Tahara house over there. because it was raining. And we all fitted into that house to shelter from that rain. And sitting in front of me and looking up at me was Tamara Green, Hanka Pressberg, Claire Columbus Winter, and of course my mother, Ilse Goldstein. If you have a hard gig, that was nothing to that. And they were listening to me expectantly. I can still see them now as we honour them and many, many others. I have here on a beautiful summer's day, I leave that to you to think about, but it's on a day in summer in this free country of ours, it's really hard to imagine Auschwitz or Bergen-Belsen ever happened, but they did. At all those places and many, many more, civilization sank to its lowest depth, hell on earth. My mother, Ilse Fischer as she was then, was taken from a holding apartment in Vienna to Theresienstadt on the 29th of September 1942. The Fischer family were moved from their real home in the Ringstrasse district years before. The family did not go willingly like lambs to the slaughter. When gangs of people come in the middle of the night with guns and dogs and knives, what choice do you have? You survive another day. As my mother always said, when there is life, there is hope. 3 weeks before she died, my mother spoke of that moment when they were taken from their home. She said she felt as if her insides were ripped out. She said that feeling never left her and she never felt whole again. At Auschwitz, although my grandparents were gassed at Auschwitz-Birkenau shortly after they arrived in October 1942, my mother Ilse and her sister Herta survived and have children of their own. My grandparents were wise and brave Menschers. At Auschwitz, Mum was tattooed with the number A4748 and went to an Arbeitslager, a work camp. Mum used to tell us of a little girl living in Wellington who once asked her what these numbers were on her arm. "Have you forgotten your phone number?" she innocently asked. In March 1943, Mum shifted to Arbeitslagers in Hamburg-Freihafen, then to Hamburg-Weidel and Hamburg-Eidelstadt. The work included clearing rubble, and I'm a little bit shorter than my mother and a lot bigger really, so I can imagine. The work included clearing rubble by hand, repairing submarines in underground caves whilst Allied bombing made the water rise dangerously close, and clearing landmines with no protection. The miracle of her survival continued when in April 1945 my mother went on to a forced death march from Eidelstadt to Bergen-Belsen. Thousands died. Today you can travel by bus or train or car between the two towns. It takes 1 hour and 9 minutes to travel the 99 kilometres, costing $14 to $21 in petrol. In April 1945 it cost thousands their life. The average temperature for that region in April is a high of 9 degrees and a low of 1 degree. My mother wore a thin cotton dress and a pair of shoes that were different sizes. If you fell, you were either shot or beaten to death or left to die in the snow. They left Eidelstadt on the 7th of April 1945. There are no official records of when they arrived in Bergen-Belsen. My mother said they were given 1 cup of ersatz coffee, made from roasted grains, when they arrived in Bergen-Belsen. This coffee was to last 2 weeks. Then most of the Nazis fled the camps. The people who made it to Bergen-Belsen just died where they fell. The living had no energy to move away from the dead. On the 15th of April 1945, the 63rd Anti-Tank Regiment and the 11th Armoured Division of the British Army liberated Bergen-Belsen. It took days of intense fighting by the British to get there. Records say when the British entered the camp, its soldiers were totally unprepared for what they found. Inside were more than 60,000 emaciated and ill prisoners in desperate need of medical attention. Inside, there were 13,000 corpses in various stages of decomposition littered around the camp. My mother said battle-hardened troops vomited at the smell and at the sight. People think of liberation as a joyful celebration, people jumping for joy, Hollywood style. Bergen-Belsen was not like that. After 7 years of starvation, hard labour, humiliation, my mother was on her last legs. She could only crawl. After liberation, more than 14,000 people died because they were too malnourished to recover. There are some disturbing newsreels of bulldozers moving mounds of bodies, piled 10 to 14 bodies high. The bodies are of people recently deceased, soft where rigor mortis has not set in. After years of struggle and survival, they had just died, most likely after liberation. Even more disturbing are the questions that the death marches raise. After all, Auschwitz had been liberated a few months before, in January. What was the point of these forced marches in April, deeper into German territory, if not to kill more? The war in Europe was virtually over, yet the Allies did not bomb the railways to the camps, whilst they bombed the historic city of Dresden, full of civilians, until it was flattened. Liberation brought many in the camp to the realization that loved ones had perished and that they were alone. For many, this realization was the worst period of their lives. My mother's sister Herta had lost her first husband, and my father's sister Manya had lost hers. My father, Berit Goldstein, was at another hell-on-earth site of World War II, Stalingrad. He was only 22, in command of a Soviet tank division. Street-to-street fighting made every moment uncertain. Sometimes the danger was from the enemy, but not always. Anthony Beaver, in his book Stalingrad, which I recently read, mentions a documented incident where a drunk Soviet commander, furious at his own troops, lifted the hatch of a Soviet tank and shot dead his own men. As a child, I remember Dad having nightmares. After the war, Dad went looking for his family, and he escaped a pogrom in Kielce in Poland in 1946. You do the maths. And eventually found his two sisters, Hanka and Manya, in Bergen-Belsen. He also met my mother there, and they were married in August 1947. The wedding photo shows two skinny youngsters from very different backgrounds, in love and getting married, but looking pensive and sad in some photos because their parents and wider family could not be with them, could never be with them. Recently I took a visitor through the Holocaust Centre, and she asked me how ordinary, decent people could let the Holocaust happen. Without hesitation, I pointed to a May 1933 photograph of a book burning rally of books considered unacceptable to Nazi thought. 25,000 books were burnt at that event to censor thought considered anti-Nazi. A line from Hermann Heine's 1821 play, Almansor, A Tragedy, is quoted. It says, "Where they burn books, they will in the end also burn people." Destruction of free speech and critical thinking, trying to control thought through propaganda, is the most dangerous thing. The Holocaust started with words, propaganda and limiting free speech. It ended in death camps, death marches and Bergen-Belsen. Because of my experiences, my mother and father had a home which was open to people of every race and nation. I have never met a German I didn't like. As a rule, they are thoughtful and kind. Yet one of the most evil movements the world has ever known took root in Germany before spreading to other European countries. Nazism took over very quickly and suffocated free thought and society everywhere. People who valued freedom then became powerless to stop Nazism. It is all very well to distance the Holocaust as something that happened in Europe. Not here, a long time ago. What does it have to do with us living in New Zealand today? In New Zealand, free speech is fundamental to our way of life. You can't say anything you like, but in order to live in peace and harmony, the aim is to respect others who are different or think differently. To preserve that freedom, we need to think critically and freely access diverse sources of information: the press, television, and books. The danger is in accepting the 7-second sound bites on social media as the truth. It is up to each one of us to make sure we are well informed and educated. Yet even in our free society, some New Zealand investigative journalists have received death threats. Information and education are key to not repeating the Holocaust. Yet only 30% of New Zealand adults 18 years and over know about the Holocaust. This is concerning. If we wish to keep our multicultural society free of hatred, we need to be mindful of the lessons of the Holocaust. If you or your children or your children's school have not visited the Holocaust Centre of New Zealand, please do so. The centre here in Wellington is open every day except Saturday to the public from 10 to 1 and runs a visitors programs for groups by appointment. Finally, is New Zealand safe? We are here sitting in the cemetery where in 2004 most of the headstones we can see from this spot were knocked over and damaged. The perpetrators are still out there, circulating with their hate-filled philosophy. They were never brought to justice. This time last year, someone drew a swastika outside my synagogue. 82 years ago, they drew a swastika outside my grandparents' shop in Vienna. 6 years later, my grandparents were murdered. To keep New Zealand safe and free, it is incumbent on each one of us here to be educated and informed. If anything is to be learnt from the Holocaust, we should not wait for acts of hatred, violence and terror. We should act whenever words of hatred and prejudice are levelled at any group. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance. Each one of us can play a part in being responsible for checking information before we share it, to make sure the information is factual, not propaganda or half-truths. To me, this is one of the enduring lessons of Bergen-Belsen. Thank you for taking the time to attend this commemoration. And for my waiata, I'm calling on Mona to join me. We're going to sing, Mona's going to sing Sim Shalom. It's a song of hope and that we sing every Shabbat. And the words that you're going to sing, Mona, in Hebrew mean, "O God, may we never become complacent, faltering in our effort to build a world of peace. Let the nations know and understand that justice and right are better than dominion and conquest. May all come to see that it is not by might nor power, but by your Spirit that life prevails."
Sim Shalom Tova Uvracha. Sim Shalom Tova Uvracha. Shalom Tova Uvracha. Shalom, Shalom Tova Uvracha. Shalom Tova Uvracha. Shalom, Shalom Tova Uvracha. Sim Shalom. Sim Shalom Tova Uvracha. In Ba'chesed v'rachamim v'rachamim Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol Yisrael Amecha Vorheinu Avinu kulanu kechad ve'or panecha Ki be'or panecha natata lanu ad Hashem Eloheinu Lai 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 Sim Shalom Tova Uvracha In Ba'chesed v'rachamim v'rachamim Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol Yisrael Amen. Shalom.
Thank you, Carol, for a wonderful address from the harrowing account of your parents' experiences during the Shoah to your analysis of what we must do to prevent it from happening again. And you touched on exactly the same points that the Secretary General Guterres of the United Nations made in an address, I think today, I read it on the internet, in a synagogue in New York, where he says if we allow ourselves to believe falsehood, as has happened increasingly, particularly over the last year during the COVID pandemic, and are swayed by what social media tell us, which is wicked and false and intended to do harm, then we will descend unfortunately again to the depths of the Holocaust. So you have made the same point that Mayor Foster and Mr. Yaakoby have made, that we have all individual responsibility to avoid going down that path. And thank you, Mona, for beautiful singing. I was very struck that here at a commemoration based on Jewish experience, that we are using the custom of the tangata whenua by having a waiata after a speech like yours, Carol. And the tune that Mona used to begin Sim Shalom is a tune, Dona nobis pacem, give us peace. So it was bringing together different strands of what we all hope for. Now we will come to the laying of stones at the Holocaust Memorial, and I'll first of all call on a wonderful group of Holocaust survivors in our community to come forward and lay a stone. And they are Rachel Kalkoen, Mary Mowbray, Fania Teigman, Vera Egemeyer, Stephen Sedley, and Eileen Celestian. And they will be accompanied by children from the Wellington Jewish community to remind us of the generations which follow the Holocaust and survive and maintain Jewish identity and Jewish values. Vera is a survivor of the Theresienstadt concentration camp near Prague, where she was liberated by the Soviet army when she was, I think, 4 years old. Representing the second generation of Holocaust survivors, Irene Buxton and Kathy Carey. I will now ask Ambassador Stefan Krawiecki, the ambassador from the Federal Republic of Germany, and the ambassador designate from Israel, Mr. Ran Yaakoby, to lay a stone. The mayor commented that he thought how appropriate it was that the two ambassadors were sitting next to each other here. Over the very many years, we've found it immensely heartwarming and supporting the way in which the German embassy and successive German ambassadors have given their support to occasions like this and to other events affecting the Jewish community. And I had written down a comment made by the current Chancellor, German Chancellor, Angela Merkel. Every German government and every German Chancellor before me were duty-bound to Germany's special historical responsibility for Israel's security. And so seeing you two walking together to lay a stone is very heartwarming. Thank you. I'll now ask Greg O'Connor, MP for Ohio, representing the government, and the Mayor, Andy Foster, to together lay a stone. I'll now ask three of our very staunch sponsors to lay a stone as a group. They are Zuleika Chang, who's Acting Secretary General of the New Zealand National Commission for UNESCO, Nigel Rowland from the Wilson Funeral Home, who sponsors each year the bus which brings people from Parliament to this occasion, and also sponsors the printing of the programs for the event, and Emily Friedlander from the Council of Jewish Women. The Council of Jewish Women were major contributors to the Holocaust Memorial itself, which is there, which we are laying stones at. I'll now ask Marlene Levine, who is the chair of the Wellington Jewish Community Centre, that is the Orthodox community congregation in Wellington, and Jeremy Smith, who is chair of the Wellington Progressive Jewish Congregation, also known as Temple Sinai, to together each lay a stone. And now I'll ask the two leaders of the Wellington Jewish youth groups to lay a stone. They are Noah Merkin from the Habonim Draw movement and Isaac Thompson Gregg from the B'nai Akiva youth group. Now I'll ask the two representatives from Wellington Interfaith Council to come forward to lay a stone. They are Manjit Gruwal, who is the chair of the Interfaith Council, and Mere Fiore, who is the deputy chair. Manjit is a member of the Hindu community, Sikh community, beg your pardon, I'm sorry. And Mary represents the Church of Latter-day Saints, Church of Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints. And to the Jewish community, it's very supportive that the interfaith movement in Wellington has always been represented at this event year after year, and the Jewish community in turn has aimed to play a part in the activities of the interfaith community, as Mayor Foster mentioned earlier. And I'll call on the last stone layers, who are a couple from out of town, Mayan Bielik, who has come from Auckland, and Leah Berger, who's come from Auckland as well, together with Felix Steiner. They are the prize winners from the Paul Seidemann Annual Composition Award. That's for an essay that they write on a Holocaust topic, held every year. It was endowed and is named after Paul Seidemann, who was a survivor from Auschwitz and many other camps, and now lives in retirement in Avalon. And these three young people were successful in winning prizes, and they will receive them later on this afternoon. Well, I would like to thank all of the stone layers for undertaking that part of the commemoration, and I suppose particularly the children, who have done far more walking backwards and forwards than anybody else. Well, we're coming to the end of the ceremony. Thank you for sitting in the increasing wind. Remembering the past and honouring those who suffered, as we've done this afternoon, is an important part of improving the future. And I believe that we should always face the future with hope and optimism, not with pessimism. As we've heard this afternoon, Holocaust Remembrance also carries a challenge. As the Governor-General of New Zealand and patron of the Holocaust Centre of New Zealand has said, Holocaust Remembrance reminds us to raise our voices in defence of people who are suffering discrimination, harassment or violence because of their ethnicity or religious affiliations. I think that has run through the whole proceedings this afternoon. The huge impact of the COVID-19 pandemic in the last year has created more suffering, disruption and fear than the world has seen for a long time. That brings with it an increase in extremism, anti-Semitism and racism. people turn to conspiracy theories, dehumanize those who are different from themselves, and look for scapegoats. We've seen this anti-Semitism growing in North America, Europe and Scandinavia. Even Australia and our own country are recording more anti-Jewish attitudes and incidents. Here, there are left-wing, extreme left-wing and right-wing social media sites which are fomenting anti-Semitism, such as blaming Jews for the COVID epidemic, pandemic. I find it unconscionable and actually frightening that 3 members of our parliament belong to a Facebook page which propagates Holocaust denial. We have to ask, is Holocaust remembrance of dead Jews enough if it fails to link the lessons of those historic times to living Jews today? I hope you leave Makara and the commemoration that we've been part of this afternoon in a serious but not a sombre mood, and take with you the sincere expressions from our speakers. Personally, I will not forget Dame Susan Devoy's closing words at a previous commemoration on this spot. Hate starts small, but so too does hope. We now invite everyone here who has not already laid a stone to come forward and place a stone at the Holocaust Memorial. So thank you again for coming, and good afternoon, ka kite anō, and tofa and shalom.